What if I told you that before Hitler rose to power, a secretive group obsessed with Nordic myths and occult rituals was already planting the seeds of Nazi ideology? This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a documented chapter of history. Today, we explore the mysterious Thule Society, a shadowy group that combined esotericism, racial theory, and nationalism, helping forge one of the darkest movements in human history. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're passionate about untold history, dark ideologies, and the hidden threads that shaped the 20th century. Germany in 1918 was a nation on its knees, defeated in World War. Stripped of territory and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, the country became a breeding ground for political extremism. Amid hunger, inflation, and street violence, people searched for answers. Some turned to radical politics, others to mysticism. In this atmosphere of chaos, the Thule Society emerged in Munich. Publicly, it presented itself as a study group for Germanic history and culture. But behind closed doors, it was far more ideological and far more dangerous. Founded in 1918 by a man named Rudolf von Sebottendorf, the Thule Society was obsessed with the idea of a pure Aryan race. Its name, Thule, was drawn from a mythical northern land described in ancient Greek and Roman texts, believed by some occultists to be the ancestral home of the Aryans. Members of the Thule Society believed in the superiority of this ancient race, tracing their bloodlines back to Nordic gods and heroic warriors. But this wasn't just romantic nationalism. It was combined with a deep hostility toward Jews, communists, and anyone considered non-Aryan. The society merged folklore, theosophy, and anti-Semitic ideology, creating a potent and toxic blend of myth and hate. The Thule Society wasn't a mass movement. It never had millions of followers. But its influence came through its members, wealthy, well-connected, and often already involved in paramilitary groups like the Freikorps. The Thule Society's anti-Semitism and opposition to the Weimar Republic led them to back paramilitary groups known as the Freikorps, right-wing militias that violently suppressed leftist uprisings. Members of the Thule Society helped organize these militias, which contributed to the atmosphere of political violence that gripped Germany in the early 1920s. Some scholars argue that the Thule Society's secretive and elitist nature helped foster the culture of conspiracy, thinking that would come to dominate Nazi ideology. Their paranoia about Jewish conspiracies and communist threats was not unique, but their influence gave these ideas a veneer of mystical and historical legitimacy that resonated deeply in the post-war context. The society funded and supported the German Workers' Party, a fringe nationalist group. One of its most important members was Dietrich Eckart, a poet and journalist who would later become a mentor to a young man just beginning to speak at political rallies. That man was Adolf Hitler. Hitler joined the German Workers' Party in 1919. Shortly after, Eckart took him under his wing, introducing him to nationalist elites and helping craft his oratory style. Eckart wasn't just a mentor. He saw Hitler as a kind of messianic figure for Germany. Although Hitler never officially joined the Thule Society, the organization's ideological fingerprints were all over the early Nazi party, from racial purity myths to the use of occult and runic symbols. Hitler later downplayed the influence of occultists like Eckart, but the early ideological groundwork was undeniable. Thule members weren't just idealists. They were fighters. Many were involved in the Freikorps, right-wing militias that battled communists and radicals in the streets of post-war Germany. One of the most notorious events was the execution of the Bavarian Soviet Republic's leaders in 1919, carried out by Freikorps troops. Thule members had allegedly drawn up a list of leftist enemies, some of whom were killed. In this sense, the society wasn't just preaching myth, it was participating in violent political cleansing. As the Nazi Party grew in the 1920s, its need for arcane societies like Thule began to fade. The NSDAP under Hitler wanted power, not mysticism. Many of the early occultists were pushed aside or forgotten. Some died, others disappeared. A few clung to roles within the party, but the new regime was about mass mobilization and control, not secret rituals. Still, the ideological seeds remained. The Nazi obsession with race, symbolism, and destiny had been watered by groups like the Thule Society. Over time, the society became the subject of myths and conspiracy theories. Stories emerged of dark rituals, hidden magic, even contact with aliens. But there's no evidence for any of that. What is clear is this: they used myth to justify ideology and fantasy to inspire real violence. As we move further away from the early 20th century, the story of the Thule Society takes on new meanings, some grounded in history, others in myth. Understanding this legacy means recognizing how its symbols and ideas have been repurposed and sometimes distorted across the decades. After World War II, the society became a symbol often associated with Nazi occultism in popular culture. Films, books, and documentaries frequently link it to secret Nazi rituals, or even supernatural power. However, most historians caution against these sensational claims. The real Thule Society was a nationalist and occult group that was largely marginalized once the Nazi Party gained full control over Germany. Despite this, the iconography and ideology linked to the society have persisted. The swastika, an ancient symbol with diverse meanings across many cultures, remains forever tied in the public consciousness to Nazi Germany. Similarly, the pseudo-historical concept of the Aryan race continues to be exploited by white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups around the world, groups that often claim ideological descent from Völkisch and Thule ideas. The society emphasis on racial purity and mystical nationalism has unfortunately inspired many hate groups throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Their ideology is not just a historical curiosity, but a cautionary tale about how mythology and mysticism can be weaponized for political ends. Modern scholars have worked to separate fact from fiction. Primary documents, meeting records, and testimonies show that the group's power was more symbolic and social than institutional or political. It was a small circle of intellectuals and extremists rather than a mass movement or a secret shadow government. Yet the fact remains, the Thule Society did contribute to the early ideological climate from which the Nazi Party emerged. It gave form and language to a worldview that combined racial hatred with mysticism, and it helped introduce some key figures into the burgeoning Nazi movement. The challenge today is to remember the lessons of history without sensationalizing or distorting them. This society stands as an example of how dangerous ideas, when wrapped in the allure of ancient mystery and racial superiority, can help legitimize violence and oppression. That's what makes it so dangerous. Not because it summoned supernatural forces, but because it made hate look heroic, even sacred. Today, fringe groups still draw inspiration from Thule myths. But historians remind us that the society's real power wasn't in magic, it was in messaging. It took cultural despair and gave it a scapegoat. It took confusion and offered purity. And it took nationalism and turned it into dogma. Understanding how fringe ideas can enter the mainstream is essential. It didn't begin with Hitler, and it didn't end with him either. Today, the legacy of the Thule Society serves as a reminder of the dangers when pseudoscience, mythology, and political Ideology merge unchecked. It illustrates how secretive groups can wield disproportionate cultural influence, especially when they tap into collective fears and desires for identity and belonging. If you found this video insightful, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into hidden history. And tell us in the comments, what other historical societies or secret groups would you like us to explore? History is full of shadows. Let's keep uncovering them together.